And this morning, in this session, I'm very pleased to welcome from the Pro-Life Campaign, Ms. Caroline Sims, Dr. Barry Kiely, from Youth Defence, Dr. Eoghan Faoite and Dr. Sean O'Donnell, from Family and Life, Mr. Patrick Carr and Mr. David Manley, and from the Iona Institute, Ms. Breda O'Brien and Ms. Maria Steen. You're all very welcome to me this morning, and thank you for being here and for making yourselves available. And I'm sorry you're kind of hidden in the corner. My apologies for that.
Okay. Having completed the formalities then, can I just say the testimony that we've heard over the last 2 days has completely demolished any argument that suicidality can be addressed by abortion, even during crisis pregnancy. Professor David Ferguson in the British Journal of Psychiatry has said there is no evidence that suggests that abortion reduces the mental health risks of unwanted or mistimed pregnancy. That's referred to on page 6 of our written submission. That being the case then, why are the legislators even contemplating passing legislation against the medical evidence? The answer is because they believe they have to because of the X case, and they're being told that they must because of what the ABC decision of the European Court has required. I'll come back to that in a moment. What would be the impact of passing this legislation? Firstly, psychiatrists would be asked to propose a procedure for which there is no psychiatric justification. Obstetricians would be asked to terminate the lives of healthy babies in physically healthy women, and legislators would have violated the most basic human right for a reason which cannot be justified. Society would perceive that the right to life for the unborn is not really that important, and we're not really serious about protecting it. After all, it can be violated on an entirely irrational and unjustifiable basis. After a time, this becomes received wisdom, and that is the end of the culture of life and the beginning of the culture of abortion. If you surrender the principle of the right to life of the unborn, that sends a message to society, which in turn produces a cultural change. Then other cultural questions emerge. What other rights will you overwhelm when their subjects are not very important? Some people refer to this as the slippery slope argument. Whatever you call it, it is certain that ideas like these have real consequences. Why do so many of the doctors who have addressed this committee want legislation? The pro-choice advocates, some of whom frequent this chamber, understand the possibilities for their agenda and have welcomed the proposed legislation as an important first step and a beginning. But most of the doctors who have come here want something quite different. They want to know, in the words of the master of the maternity hospital, that I will not go to jail, and that they are free to make appropriate clinical judgments for their patients. The reasons for this fear are somewhat puzzling. It is not sufficient to hinder the doctors in their practice of medicine, as they've all said that they have never refused an intervention or withheld any treatment because of any fear of the law. The Irish Medical Council has not received any criticism of or request for clarification of its guidelines from any doctor or representative body regarding the practice of obstetrics. There have been no prosecutions of doctors. Now, I have no doubt that those fears are sincerely held by some doctors and that we must address this perception. But the real question is, are these fears well-founded? Obstetricians are not lawyers. Perhaps they do not appreciate the mental element required to prove a crime. A jury must be convinced beyond reasonable doubt that a doctor has acted deliberately, intending to carry out an unlawful abortion. The doctor who acts in good faith, ethically, with due care, and in a manner which another doctor of similar expertise might be expected to act in a similar circumstance, has nothing to fear from the law. Doctors make judgments all the time. They won't always be right, but that is not negligent, and it is certainly not criminal. The European Court decision of ABC recognised that Ireland may make whatever policy it chooses regarding abortion and the right to life. It doesn't require us to legislate for X. It gives no direction regarding the content or form of action we take. It requires that we have accessible procedures by which people can know the law and know where they stand, and that is entirely reasonable, and justice demands it. Legislating in this area would not be problematic were it not for the X decision itself, and here we come to the nub of it. The court heard no medical evidence. There was no psychiatric evidence. There was no duty of care to the unborn. Chief Justice Finlay considered that suicidality in pregnancy could only be avoided by abortion, against his test, and that abortion could not be postponed in order to monitor the woman's condition, unlike the case for physical risks to the woman's life. But perinatal psychiatrist John Sheehan has told this committee that psychiatric intervention is exactly the opposite to medical intervention, and that the notion of carrying out an emergency termination is completely obsolete, I'm quoting him, completely obsolete in respect of a person who is suicidal. So after this week, we know that abortion will never address the suicidal woman's actual needs, and it might very well harm her. It is therefore unthinkable that we should legislate for abortion to address suicidality. Ultimately, a referendum will be required to deal with the difficulties posed by the X case. In the meantime, we propose that the Medical Council should draw up guidelines to deal specifically with the issues surrounding medical interventions for physical complications of pregnancy. The Government should give a commitment to the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe that guidelines will be drawn up by the appropriate bodies of medical expertise within the medical profession, based on medical practice, addressing ABC case, giving the clarity that's required. The Government should give a commitment that the difficulties associated with X will be examined, the options for clarifying them identified, and that the Government will keep the Committee informed of progress. The Committee of Ministers has acknowledged a significant increase in the number of cases relating to complex and sensitive issues which need more time to resolve. This issue is indeed complex and it is certainly sensitive, but this committee's efforts over the last few days have clarified much of what was confused. For this, we owe you our thanks. Now that they are clearly identified, we may finally address the problems posed by the X case and ensure that every woman in Ireland can be confident of the continued highest standard of maternal and fetal care. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Thank you very much indeed. And sorry for the interruption with the microphones. My
That's
apologies.
quite all right.
If you want to play, swap the seat again. If you want to think Mr. Faoite maybe might be going to do that. And to your credit, you're one of the few witnesses and members who've adhered to the time limit, so thank you for that. I want to welcome now from Youth Defence Mr. Dr. Eoghan Dr. Faoite, you have 7 minutes.
Okay,
Up to 7 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my time with Dr. Sean O'Donnell of the Life Institute. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Eoghan Dr. I'm a medical doctor and I'm a member of Youth Defence Pro-Life Group. I've been involved in pro-life activities, I guess, since my late teens, and I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to invite me here today to address you on this current debate. I firstly wanted to refer to the 2010 decision of the European Court of Human Rights in the ABC versus Ireland case, which is largely the reason we all find ourselves in this room today. Contrary, I think, to the many media reports and some statements made by government officials and others on the ruling, the ECHR absolutely did not demand or even require that Ireland legislate for abortion. In fact, no legal right to abortion exists in the European Convention. Instead, the Court asked that Ireland provide clarity, which can, of course, be provided without legislating for the X case. The second point I'd like to make is in relation to abortion and maternal health care, which I believe really is the crux of this issue. It goes without saying that Ireland is a world leader when it comes to maternal health. Our excellent track record and high standards of maternal health care, coupled with our extremely low rates of maternal mortality, are second to none. We have achieved such high standards to date without legalised abortion. And that's because Irish obstetricians and other specialists will always intervene to save the life of a mother when she has a life-threatening complication of pregnancy. This practice of intervening, which includes premature delivery of the baby, even when the baby has little or no chance of surviving, is permitted in Ireland today. It's permitted under Irish law, under the Medical Council's ethical guidelines, and within pro-life principles. As a medical practitioner, I believe that the Medical Council's guidelines, the current guidelines, are crystal clear when it comes to intervening in pregnancy when a woman's life is at risk. And I would like to echo Professor Fionnuala McAuliffe's recent comments when she said that obstetricians know that they have absolute freedom to intervene to save the life of a woman, even if it meant the loss of life of her unborn baby. And this brings us to a crucial distinction which was clarified during the hearings before this committee on Tuesday, but it is all too often misunderstood. And that is the distinction between the termination of pregnancy and the termination of the life of a child. Irish doctors have such freedom to intervene under current Medical Council guidelines because there is a clear difference between intervening to save a woman's life, which includes premature delivery of the baby, and abortion, which intentionally destroys the life of an unborn child. The blurring of this distinction between these two practices is what is contributing mostly to public confusion today. Birth is a termination of pregnancy. An emergency caesarean section is a termination of pregnancy. Premature induction of labour is a termination of pregnancy. And thanks to the expertise of our obstetricians and neonatologists, many of these premature babies survive. How can these be described as an abortion?
You're halfway through your sharing time.
The questions asked by Senator John Crown directly address this distinction during the hearings on Tuesday. Senator Crown asked if it is necessary in permitting a life-saving termination of pregnancy to kill the fetus in utero, or can the pregnancy be delivered to give the life-saving treatment the woman needs? The Master of the National Maternity Hospital responded by saying, "We never kill a fetus. That is not our aim. Occasionally it is required that in pregnancy, before the baby is viable or capable of surviving in our neonatal intensive care unit. When there is any possibility at all we can preserve the life of the baby, we will do so. We are able to do so from a very low gestations, from 23 weeks on. In those cases, members can be very certain that we will make every effort to preserve life. It was also established that there were no known instances where a mother had needlessly lost her life because of any supposed lack of clarity in the legal framework. Thirdly, and briefly, I would like to address the claims so very often made by pro-abortion campaigners that women need to leave Ireland in order to access so-called life-saving abortions in the UK or elsewhere. I know that many of my medical colleagues find it grossly insulting to their profession to suggest that we are somehow risking women's lives by not permitting abortion in Ireland. Almost always these claims are made without any foundation or without any fact. Figures freely available under Freedom of Information from the Department of Health show these claims to be entirely false. The most recent data from the Department of Health for the years 1992 to 2010 inclusive clearly show that there were 0 abortions carried out on Irish women in Britain under Category F of the Abortion Act, which records abortions carried out to save the life of the mother. Furthermore, there were 0 abortions carried out on Irish women in Britain during the same period under Category G, which records abortions carried out, and quote, to prevent grave permanent injury to the physical or mental health of the mother. And that number is 0 because Irish women are never denied care, life-saving care, that they need during pregnancy. A review of this evidence, easily undertaken, has therefore revealed that Irish women are not travelling to the UK to undergo so-called life-saving abortions because they are being denied treatment in Ireland. The truth remains that Irish women are safe in Ireland and are receiving today whatever life-saving treatments they need.
Mr. Manley.
I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Sean O'Donnell. Thanks so much.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the Health Committee and members of the public and public representatives, I'm a consultant in general adult psychiatry, working in the public, independent and voluntary sectors where I deal with the broadest possible case mix. I've also worked as a consultation liaison psychiatrist with particular responsibility for perinatal psychiatry in Ireland for over 2 of the last 3 years. I began my career in psychiatry in Jersey in 1997, 1 month before the legalisation of abortion on that island. My very first assessment of an attempted suicide victim was on my very first weekend on call in Jersey, when I was asked to review a 19-year-old girl who had taken a large overdose of medication. During the course of that assessment, when I asked her why it was that she had sought this ending to her life, she indicated to me that she had been pressured some 6 months earlier by her parents and by her boyfriend to undergo a termination of pregnancy. Because abortion wasn't legal in Jersey at that time, she was forced to travel to Southampton, where she had the abortion against her will. 6 months later, she had descended into a profound depression and attempted to end her life as a result. At the time of that assessment, and I remember it clearly, she said to me, as I tried to discuss with her how she would recover from this depression she was suffering, she turned to me and she said, "Can you tell me that I haven't killed my own baby? Can you tell me that I can undo what I've done? Can you tell me how to bring my baby back?" I hope today I'm in a better position to answer those questions which are asked of me on a frequent basis. But of course, in my day-to-day work, I come across women on a frequent basis who find themselves in situations that they describe as crisis pregnancies or unplanned pregnancies. And indeed, over the past 12 months alone, I can refer to a case of a lady who 22 years previously underwent an abortion, and for that following 22 years, for a period of approximately 3 weeks around the anniversary of the abortion, her husband reported that she suffered with very marked depressive mood. I've also experienced a situation where a 21-year-old girl presented for treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, having had an abortion at the advice of her mother and her aunt some 7 years earlier. And I think that these people are being left out of the have been left out of the hearings to a large extent. According to the major textbook of psychiatry, edited by Professor Basson Puri, I quote from the third edition of that book, Revision Notes in Psychiatry. And here's a quote: "Only 10% of women suffer with severe and/or prolonged sequelae as a result of induced abortion." And
Thank you.
I think the word "only" there shows us what opinion is being taken and what approach is taken towards these women who suffer as a result. That means a figure of approximately 19,000 women in Britain, and in this country at present somewhere in the region of 400 women per year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to welcome Mr. David Manley for Family Life. Mr. Manley, you've got 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Family and Life, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to address it today and to allow us to contribute to its deliberations. I hope that I and my colleague, Mr. Patrick Carr, will be helpful to you. What follows is a much shortened version of the written opening statement, which has already been circulated. Now, the issue of abortion is characterized as being divisive, and indeed it is. There is, however, a large area of agreement and common ground. Everyone, I assume, is in agreement that the women in Ireland should receive whatever medical care they require in pregnancy. And at the same time, there is a large majority of Irish people who would like to see the protection of unborn human life continue, provided that people are reassured that such protection will not have any weakening effect on medical care provided to pregnant women. All but a small number are content to see the comprehensive prohibition of abortion in Ireland. And I'm using the word abortion in the commonly understood sense, and I'm aware of the confusion that surrounds this word. In the 2010 case of ABC versus Ireland, the European Court of Human Rights did not require Ireland to legalise abortion. The court required the government to put in place procedures that are effective and accessible for women. It made no stipulation as to what the legal status of these procedures should be. Following the decision of the European Court in that case, the government established an expert group to lay out the options available to it. Unfortunately, and for reasons not altogether clear, the expert group's remit was restricted to giving advice, and I quote, on how to give effect to existing constitutional provisions, end of quote. In other words, it limited itself to options giving effect to the Constitution and the X case judgment. The 1992 judgment of the Supreme Court in the X case is, and I believe will remain, the source of our current legal difficulty and social controversy until such time as its suicide provision is removed. The European Court of Human Rights judgment only requires Ireland to address the perceived lack of clarity in its law on abortion. In reality, the clarity which the court requires can be provided without enshrining in statute law a principle that allows for the direct and intentional killing of an innocent human being. In other words, of the suicide provision. And I depend very much, I think, on Professor William Binchy's testimony yesterday. It is clear from the testimony given by prominent obstetricians who have come before this committee that further clarity is desirable indeed. But it is important to note that whatever lack of clarity presently exists and existed, it clearly did not prevent doctors in Ireland from providing women in pregnancy with a high standard of medical care that they need. It is regrettable, I believe, that the government has prematurely committed itself to a course of action without the benefit of the valuable testimony that has been presented to this committee over the recent days, and indeed to the work of this committee. This is particularly so since the course of action chosen involves legislation giving statutory effect to the suicide provision of the X case. All the psychiatrists who testified before this committee agreed that abortion is not a treatment for suicidality, and predicting who will take their lives is not a workable project. The idea that lives of some human beings are less valuable than those of others has no place in Irish law. The Irish Constitution recognises the fundamental equality of all human beings. To their abiding credit, at a time when so many other countries were moving in the opposite direction, the Irish people in 1983 made explicit that this equality extends to the most vulnerable of human beings, the unborn. The Irish people's decision was based, as the European Court of Human Rights recognised, and again I quote, on profound moral values concerning the nature of life, which have not been demonstrated to have relevantly changed since then. Now I believe there are some promises that should not be broken, and that the government has no mandate to legislate for direct and intentional killing of unborn children. To do so would be to make a law that would be fundamentally unjust, violating the most basic of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manley. And finally, I want to welcome Ms. Breda from the Iona Institute. I think who's going to speak. You have 7 minutes. Thank you.
As a woman whose primary qualification to be here is as a woman, a mother and a teacher, I'm particularly grateful for the opportunity to interact with TDs and senators at such an important time as this.
Sure, Mr. O'Brien. You can, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
And thank you very much for that. I've spent nearly 3 decades teaching young women who are the primary group that are going to be affected by any decisions that you make. And in that time, I've witnessed something terrifying, which you have also witnessed, which is the normalising of suicide, that it becomes part of a menu of options as a response to extreme stress. And like many of you, my own family has been touched by suicide. So when a girl comes to me in school and whispers, "I don't think I can go on much longer," I take it very, very seriously. I move immediately to put a circle of care around her, beginning with her parents. People have expressed concerns that if we exclude suicide as a grounds for abortion, that we're somehow stigmatising mental illness. In fact, the grave mistake would be to fail to see that there is a difference. Doctor after doctor has told us that they never fail to intervene where there is a life-threatening risk to a mother. But someone far more qualified than I, perinatal psychiatrist Dr. John Sheehan, has said that in the case of suicidal threat, the notion of carrying out an emergency termination is completely obsolete. A better, a calmer intervention is needed. So, suicide is different. And if we're going to enact just and safe legislation, it has to be treated differently. The judges in the X case acted in good faith in deciding what they did. The tragic consequences for Miss C, the first girl after X to whom the test was applied, were a direct result. Miss C had been brutally raped at 13. Unlike Miss X, Miss C was psychiatrically assessed and taken to England by the state for termination. The consequences were disastrous. She has never gotten over the loss of the baby and has made numerous suicide attempts since. Thankfully, none of them have been successful. If we want to trust women, we have to trust the experience of women like Miss C. The Department of Education has strict guidelines against doing anything that normalises suicide as a response to stress. Journalists would be excoriated if they described a single or a simple cause to suicide because of the danger of so-called copycat suicide or contagion. And yet, by legislating for suicide, crisis pregnancy is being presented, even in very rare circumstances, as something so awful that suicidal thoughts and threats are an acceptable reaction. Anyone with a bit of life experience will tell you, it isn't the baby that ruins your life. It's everybody else. It's the family who won't stand by you, the principal who won't give you a place in his school, the partner who'll pay for an abortion but won't pay his child support. That's what ruins your life. And it's those kind of attitudes we should be starting to act against, not the innocent baby growing in the womb. If we legislate on the grounds of abortion, we're doing something seismic. We're saying, within a year of enshrining the best interests of the child into the Constitution, something I voted for, within a year, we're saying that it's acceptable to end the life of a child because her mother is in distress. How can that be in a child's best interests? No one, but no one, objects to life-saving treatment for a pregnant woman. But we mourn and we sympathise with the family that loses a baby as a result, even though we rejoice that the mother is still with us. In the expert report, it refers to delivering children on the fringes of viability. In the case of suicide, the perinatal psychiatrists say there is never an emergency where an immediate abortion is necessary. So you're asking an obstetrical team to scrub up some morning and deliberately induce labour and deliberately deliver an extremely premature baby. That premature baby will be at risk of brain damage, blindness, and even death. In the case of life-threatening illness in the mother, saving the child would be a triumph no matter what the challenges. But think of the devastating consequences for the child in the case of psychiatric illness. And all of this is in the absence of benefit, of any evidence of benefit to the mother. And I'm going to quote Planned Parenthood, which is the biggest single abortion provider in the United States. A woman with an unwanted pregnancy is as likely to have mental health problems from abortion as she is from giving birth. A woman with a history of mental health problems before abortion is more likely to have mental health problems after abortion. We're being told that in the case of wanting to die by suicide because you're pregnant, that abortion is not treatment, but as part of a package, it just might be appropriate medical care.
2 minutes remaining.
Something that might just help does not meet the test set out in the expert group report. A real and substantial risk that can only be avoided by a termination of the pregnancy. No one that you've heard from any viewpoint has even gone near suggesting that an abortion meets the criteria of being the only way of preventing suicide. Something that just might be appropriate medical care is a very shaky foundation on which to build legislation. Martin Luther King in his jail in Birmingham said, there are just and unjust laws. You have a moral and a legal duty to follow just laws. You have a moral duty, responsibility to disobey unjust laws. Legislating on the grounds of suicide would be both unsafe and unjust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sims. Mr. Bryan, sorry, my apologies. Thank you.